Hello everyone, welcome back for week 7 as we start the development phase of our ADDIE process. And we start looking at how to develop different types of material. Okay, this week we're going to take a look at written materials. Specifically, we want to answer the question today, how can we write effective training materials? Okay, what does that look like? What goes into that? This is part of our ongoing learning objective for this unit. Right, the development unit, where we are going to try and develop all sorts of types of materials, including written materials. And then next week, we'll look at multimedia, then interactive materials, and then eventually hands-on. Today, when we talk about written training materials, we're going to go over a couple different ideas. We're going to look at who is the written material for, what is our use case, how are our learners or faculty going to be accessing that material, some different technology options, and finally, we're going to talk about some things to keep in mind when writing these materials that we've already talked about a little in the course. Okay, the first thing you'll need to consider when writing your materials is who is it for? Right? Are these learner-focused materials? Things like training manuals, handbooks, or workbooks? Right? In that case, we need to write our material for that learner specifically, or for that learner group, right? Considering their needs, objectives they need to meet, and that sort of thing. Or sometimes we write materials for our trainers themselves. Okay, this might be facilitator guides, lesson plans, scripts for an electronic video or instructional video, that sort of thing. So, step 1, always in the learning process, who is this learning material for, right? What am I writing this for? Who am I going to serve with this material? That should be the first thing you consider. Next, you want to consider what is the use case, right? What is this written material going to be used to do? Is it going to be an instructional material, right? A material that introduces or teaches content directly. This is something that you might read about to learn about a new idea, or you might read a textbook to learn about a new concept, right? This is kind of direct content that the students or facilitators might access. There's also supporting materials. These are materials that support or assess the learning of content. Okay, so your quizzes, your tests might fit into supporting materials, or you could even call them assessment materials. Things like note takers or organizers, graphic organizers, might fit into this category. Right? These are things that are good to have that help students better learn the content from the instructional materials. Finally, we have reference materials. Right? These are materials that provide quick access to content. These are things students or facilitators might look up during a training or look up while they're on the job. Right? And they just forgot this one detail, so they just need to look it up in those written materials, right? Those reference materials. Furthermore, in today's learning environment, we also have to consider how our students or facilitators are accessing materials, right? Is it traditional in-person access? Maybe they're reading a written document or a book, even a poster on the wall or instructions on the side of a machine. Right, things like that could all be written training materials that people access in person. Right, they read them live. Or perhaps there's digital access. Right, things like web pages, blogs, wiki entries, online presentation materials, right, are all considered written materials that people might access digitally. And it's important to consider when we're talking about both of these cases, the accessibility overall of your materials, right? Are they in the right language for your learner group? Right? Are there multiple languages that your materials need to be in for accessibility? That's something to consider. Take a look at the font style, text size, length of paragraphs, and formatting. Right? Is a student with dyslexia going to be able to process your materials? Or do we need to maybe tweak some of these parameters to provide more accessibility? Another accessibility point, reading level and vocabulary. Okay, are you using vocabulary that your students or facilitator will understand? right? Is the reading level appropriate for the people that you are trying to train? Right? All things to consider. And finally, maybe the person has trouble with their vision. Consider adding read aloud options if we're talking digital materials, or maybe we use some Braille if we're doing in-person materials. Right? You see Braille labels and Braille instructions all over the place in university buildings. That's for accessibility reasons. We want anyone to be able to access our content, ideally. Okay, next, when it comes to your technology options for actually creating the written materials, I think a lot of you guys are familiar with the basics, right? I'm sure everyone's used Word at some point in their lives, but just to go over, there are lots of word processors out there. Microsoft Word is one, Google Docs is another. Okay, and there's alternatives too, things like LibreOffice Writer or Free Office Text Maker, right? There's lots of programs out there if you find yourself not able to use Word or Google for whatever reason. Additionally, we might create a blog post or a blog web page, right? And there's lots of applications that help you do that to build simple text-based web pages. I'm going to stay with the Microsoft theme here since I know UNR is backed by Microsoft and we have access to Microsoft Office as students. So Microsoft Sway is Microsoft's blog application. Google has Google Blogger, but there's also other programs like Bluehost or WordPress that you might check out if you want to write a blog for your training, right? Additionally, there are designer applications. These are a little more free form than your typical word processors, allow more flexibility and allow you to edit a little more. These are things like Microsoft Publisher, Adobe Acrobat, Adobe InDesign, or Affinity Publisher. Okay, so if you wanted to design like a booklet or a pamphlet or something that looked a little snazzier than your typical word processor document, you might check out one of those options. Now, some ideas to keep in mind when we're developing our written materials. These are things we talked a little bit about throughout the course, but they definitely apply when we go to develop our materials. You want to always keep in mind the needs of your learners, the needs of your trainers, okay, any learning objectives you're trying to meet, right? All of our content we create should come with these three things first, right? That's what we have in mind as we go to develop these learning materials. And like last week, we also talked about chunking and scaffolding, and that is still definitely appropriate with written materials, right? And how you chunk those materials and how you break them down will help your learners access those better. So definitely things to keep in mind. Next class, we're going to extend this kind of written material development to the multimedia stage, right? We're going to bring in visual pictures as well as verbal speech. And we're going to take a look at how we can incorporate pictures and speech alongside text to make better training materials. Okay, so that's what we're working towards next class. All right, and to wrap things up this week, we have a knowledge check again. So knowledge check number 5. This time we're going to have another discussion style post. And your initial post will be made by this Friday, 10/10. And in it, I would like you guys to once again come up with that training scenario, and we're going to develop a written material for that training. Okay, and I would like to know, who is that training material for? What is the use case of the training material? Okay, what are you going to use it to do? What learning objective or objectives are associated with that training, right? What do you want your learners to know? And then I would like just a quick writing sample. This can be a list. This can be a paragraph. This might be a practice problem. Okay, but just give us a quick snapshot of that writing that would go into that training material, so that way our peers have something to give us feedback on. Okay, and as far as the feedback goes, I'm going to have you guys reply to 2 of your peers by Monday, 10/13, and I'd like you to focus on 2 things. 1, the accessibility. Does the writing sample seem accessible? If not, how might we better address that? right? How might we add more accessibility? And 2, does the content contain that chunking and scaffolding piece? And if not, how might we address that? Okay, so that's our knowledge check this week. Check out the learning resources like normal. Remember, make your initial post by 10:10. We're replying to our peers by 10:13. Okay, our storyboard is also due 10:13, so make sure you get that turned in. And you guys have a wonderful week.